Christian, welcome to our View from the Owner Room.
Thanks for having me.
I am delighted to have you here today because I'm eager to hear about your family's experience at working through the process of articulating and then sort of creating a document that is your owner strategy and creating an owner strategy statement. So I would love to walk through what you guys did and how it benefited you today if you'll that's the honor of some of those details.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to.
So first, let me just ask you to describe your family business and where you fit in the family business. What generation is your family business in? Just give me a quick brief of who your family is in this business.
Yeah, sure. So I am part of the third generation. We are a supermarket chain based out of Western Massachusetts. The company was founded by my grandfather and his brother in the middle of the Depression, and it's one of those cool American stories, right? Where my grandfather's brother thought he was a bread salesman, and he was looking at his future, future in the bread industry, and he didn't see much of a future there, so he struck out on his own. And my grandfather, who was his younger brother, joined him a few years later. And starting in a small, one-room shop, they grew it. And then my father and his cousin and his sister kind of came in as the second generation, and they led the company up until present day. And now the third generation is involved. We have 6 members involved from the third generation, and we have a fourth generation that's not quite there yet, but they are knocking on the door. So that's it in a nutshell.
And what is your role? Do you work in the company, or are you just next gen owner, or where do you fit in all that?
Yeah, I work in the company. I am the director of e-commerce. I started, I think we all started as service clerks, bagging on the front end, and working in various departments. Out of college, I actually worked for another company, an insurance company, for a few years before coming back to Big Y, and went into their store management training program. So I had some experience running a couple of our supermarkets, ran our flagship liquor store, was a district manager for a period of time. And when the pandemic hit, it ushered in the need for having some sort of e-commerce platform. So I've been working through that for the last few years.
Oh, I love the whole story from the beginning to where you are now, the sort of dynamics that have brought your family to this great place where you are today, through the generations. Thank you for giving us a quick briefing of that. I wanted to ask you today if you would share with us the process that you went through on your owner strategy. First, I'd love for you to talk about what does that mean, owner strategy? What was that process? What were you actually trying to think about and decide and articulate? What was the owner strategy process for your working group or team?
Yeah. So what Banyan helped to facilitate is kind of looking at it in three aspects, right? Is your purpose, to grow the company, to control the company, or to provide liquidity for other pursuits? So from that framework, and then using our overarching question of why are we in business, that helped to narrow our focus a little bit. And I think, obviously every company, there's aspects of all three of those, right? But what we tried to understand is what part of that triangle do we fit in? What part of that triangle does Big Y fit in? And I think, talking through, well, what's our growth strategy at Big Y? And then using that to say, well, how does that impact, our control, our ownership control in the company, and how could that have a positive impact or a negative impact? And then what role does liquidity play in that, in terms of, from a philanthropy aspect to, attracting members of the family to want to join the company, right? So what does that piece look like? The founder's legacy is that of hard work, right? And put your head down and kind of just plow through, right? And it certainly was very successful for them. And I think the second generation came in and kind of took over that mindset. And I think us as the third generation, we're doing the same thing. But I think what this was really good, this process was really good, was it forced us to kind of step back a little bit and realize that we're at a point in our company where we can't really just completely put our heads down, right? We have to be a little bit more strategic in our thinking and our understanding, and the direction that we want the company to go. Um, and through this process, I think when we initially went into it, it was interesting. I think the group as a whole, kind of thought of ourselves as a growth company, right? We want to continue to grow. As we discussed and kind of parsed out the three areas, I think, and really started to discuss why we're in business and the purpose of us in business. I think we realized that we're actually, while we want to grow, we want to be very mindful of how we grow, right? And we don't want to grow at the expense of jeopardizing our company's culture. And we think the family's role in the company is to help to protect and foster that culture. So that was one of our biggest takeaways was, through this process, through the discussion, we actually realized we're not as growth oriented as we may have thought we were. And we actually realized that the role of the family is not just to grow the company and continue to push it forward, but to grow the company in a responsible way that protects that culture of caring that we've created for our customers, for our employees, for the communities we serve.
So on the owner strategy triangle, as we call it, growth, liquidity, and control, where did you guys come out? As you said, no one's ever completely one, or sometimes even not even just two, but where did you end up coming out?
We were control growth.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay, got it. Was this helpful for you to kind of have that simple language? Which of those three things are we, for just thinking about where you had already been and where you were going forward? Did that simplicity help you thinking of it through the lens of the owner strategy triangle?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, well, again, whenever you boil something down, it helps to focus the conversation a little bit, right? And I think that's what this did. The simplicity of it allowed for better dialogue, I think. You can understand what it means, right? So you can understand how it applies to you, how it applies to the company, the impacts it could have on the company, on the family. So I think, yeah, I think it helped directionally steer the conversation. Um, and again, I think the outcome was really positive for us.
So in the process of having these discussions that got you to that insight that you were going to be control growth, CG, did you learn things about either yourself or about your family, in what were unspoken assumptions, or what they were afraid of? I'm just curious how the process got you to better insight about your family business and your family.
I think no matter what social group you're a part of, whether it's a family or a business or friends, like the communication is always the number one challenge, right? That people have, right? And I think, intentional or not intentional, right? And I think, I think as a family as a whole, we're very blessed that we like each other, we get along very well with one another. But I do think there was a little bit of um, a gap in conversation between that second generation and that third generation where, and again, I think it gets back to that mantra of just, you're here to work, you're here to work for the company, you're here to just our saying was always, you're here to serve the business isn't here to serve you, right? So that's always been instilled in us. So I don't think we had a real understanding of what ownership in the company really meant. I think we saw ourselves as, yes, we are the family that owns the company, but we didn't really have an understanding of what, at least the third generation have an understanding of what that actually meant. So I think this allowed us to ask some of those questions, right? To have a forum to discuss with the second generation what that actually means. what the responsibility is of that, kind of, and where we see that going forward in the future. So again, I think it was, instead of having conversations on the side about a lot of this stuff, I think it brought our groups together to actually be able to discuss these in a safe environment, right, where we didn't feel like, I can't ask that question, right, or it put everything on the table. And I again, I give the second generation a lot of credit because they were very open and honest, and both in the information that they were sharing with us, but also maybe in some of the information they should have shared with us, 10, 15 years ago.
What did the process look like? So you talked about it feeling like a safe and open environment. Did you have making a monthly meetings? Like somebody set the agenda? How did you actually have these conversations in practical terms?
Yeah. I don't know if it was quite monthly. Maybe it was close to that though. Maybe every 6 weeks, 6 weeks to 2 months. And basically the process was, we would get together, whether in person or through Zoom, and talk through, you pick okay, control. Let's talk about control. Or I think we started with our purpose, right? We started with the purpose of the family's role in the business, right? And we would just, kind of free form, just really talk through what that is. I was the designated scribe, and so after the meeting, I'd kind of try to take what I was hearing, at least, kind of from what everyone was saying, and I would write the purpose statement, right? And once I had that written, I would send it out, and everyone would give feedback on, hey, you wrote this, but I actually think we were thinking it was more this. So I would kind of work through that, and then the next meeting, we would kind of use that as the launching point, kind of continue to have dialogue of, is that statement where we want it, or does it still need some work? And then we would go on to the next one. So we would then take control. So we broke it out kind of individually at first, and then when we had that rough draft of the document, then it was a little bit more, okay, how does this document work together, right? And once we had the drafts of all the sections, then we could kind of see, I think this is where the control piece kind of came in. We could kind of see how they all fit together. And I think that was when we realized, when we had, our statement on control, our statement on growth, and our statement on liquidity, at least drafted out. I think that was when it really was apparent that, like, oh, actually, we see a lot more value in us retaining control of the company than growing at the expense of that control.
So you sort of literally came to through these working sessions. This is how we feel about growth. This is how we feel about control. This is how we feel about liquidity. So that
Yep.
you then could say, okay, so what's the relative trade-off here? How do these things fit together?
Right.
Okay.
And then, so that was the working group, and then I think quarterly, maybe quarterly, we would gather with all the family members, right? And we would present what we've been working on. They'd present what they've been working on, and again, it was just a bigger group. We did both documents in tandem, right? So owner strategy and family employment, and there was so much overlap and so much consistency between the two, which was good. So it wasn't like, our document was saying one thing and their document was saying the other thing. So that was also a neat to see that. And then when maybe it didn't overlap, then then that was good discussion to say, well, okay, so let's talk about, that there's a little bit of a divergent opinion. Let's talk about that, because we certainly want both documents to be in sync with one another.
So the process was going on concurrently with periodic check-ins. So start to finish, start to when you first decided we need to think about doing this, and before you even assigned people onto groups, how long did it take from the first thought of we need to think about doing this to when you had something to show for it?
Well, there was a small little pandemic that happened. Right?
Did that keep
So,
you busy? Did that distract
yeah,
you in any way?
yeah, a little bit, especially in the grocery business. We had a little bit going on. Um, I think it was probably about a year and a half, start to finish. And again, the work is ongoing, right? That was just to kind of finalize the documents. But they're also, one of the things that we also tried to do is, this document is not finished. It probably never will be, right? It's finished for the time, but it's a living document, so it's going to have to, it's not like, oh, great, I'm glad we got that out of the way. It was almost the beginning, right? It was the start to, to at least give us some, something to refer to. But I would anticipate it's going to have to be revisited, periodically to say, are we still think control is where we want to be, and use it to probe some of those questions.
How do you use it now that you've created an actual document that sort of captures your family's thinking about family employment and your owner strategy? How does it affect decisions or thought thinking on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis?
I mean, it's not something we carry in our back pocket. It's not, we don't
You didn't
read it.
laminate it and give everybody
Yeah,
the family motto on. Yeah.
it's not the screen saver on our iPhones, but I think, again, since we were all part of the process, we spent upwards of a year and a half talking through it. So even though we might not refer to the document on a regular basis, it's kind of already within us, especially the triangle, the control, growth, liquidity. That's kind of become something that we almost immediately defer to. Which area does this fit in, and is that in support of kind of what our owner strategy is. So I think the real value was in getting to the final document, not so much the document itself, if that makes sense.
It's the journey, not the destination, as one of those old saying goes. Did it, even though you weren't complete, the process was still ongoing during that pesky little pandemic, did the thinking that you had already begun to do prior to the pandemic play any helpful role in decisions you had to make in the pandemic?
I don't think it played a role necessarily in the decisions we were making. I think, again, I think the real value in it is, if you're having regular ongoing dialogue and conversation amongst your family, you're just that much more in tune with how they operate, how they work. We all work together, right? But in high stress situations like a pandemic, where like you have a better understanding of who they are and how they work, right? And then that helps you understand how to navigate those relationships, right? So that you can be focused on what's most important for our employees and our customers, and not have personal things getting into the way.
Did this process teach you anything about your families that you didn't quite articulate before or know before? Did you learn anything about the people you're closest to personally and professionally by going through this process?
Yeah, that we're all really different. We're very different people, but we have the same values that were instilled in us. I mean, it's like anyone, right? I mean, there's going to be people on all ends of the spectrum, but I think what this helped to reinforce is that even though personality-wise we could be very different, we have the same values and the same desire to really work together to make the company as best as we can, which is cool, and I think you need that, right? You don't want everyone to be the same, right? And I think the differing of personalities helps move us forward, right?
I think that's a great sort of success story because you recognize that you can all be individuals, but you care about some common things, and those common things are very important and very powerful. And that's, I'll arc right back to the beginning. That's part of why you're in business together, because you share something that's really meaningful to you, and the process maybe just helped you solidify that a little bit. That it's okay to be who we are, but we care about this together, and that's really great thing too.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that other families do this process? Do you think it would be helpful for other families as well to go through an owner strategy process?
I do. Again, I mean, for all the reasons, there's a lot of value in it. And I think doing it proactively, right? Doing it when you're not facing a crisis. Sometimes you don't know when that's going to be, but I would say it was valuable that we were doing it without the pressure of having to make a really important decision and not knowing, are we a growth company, a control company, or a liquidity-based company? Not having the pressure of that, I think, really allowed us to understand and ask the honest questions versus, well, what company are we? Are we because an opportunity has presented itself? So yes, a lot of value in just getting the family together and talking about some of these things, because a lot of, there, not all the topics were easy to talk about, and some of them were uncomfortable. And you're talking about things with your dad or with your brother that you don't really, most people won't be talking about things like that with their parents or their siblings or their cousins, so but that's part of being in a family business, right? I mean, there's the family aspect of it, right, which is great. And then there's the business side of it. You almost have to separate them, but you can't separate them, if that makes any sense. So you have to find a way. So you have to find a way to discuss and talk about it.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is this gave you kind of a good framework for having those discussions, because it had purpose. The discussions had purpose. So those things that needed to be talked about were marching you all towards something that you agreed was important. And so it was important to have those discussions too. I love your story. I'm so happy that you shared it with us today. Thank you for joining us and sharing your details. And we wish you all success and hope that your fourth generation gets some of the great inspiration from the third generation, the way that you did from your second generation as well.
Yeah, hopefully. That's cool, at least, right?
All right. Thanks, Christian. Thanks
thank
for
you
joining
so
us.
much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.